We were teetering with the idea of doing another review this week, but to make room for bigger projects later on, we're going to use the lesser part of our brains and make a top 10 list.
And what better place to start than with us making the saddest list ever?
Now, we haven't played every game ever, so forgive us if we don't mention a game that really feels you up.
These are the games we have played that just touched all the right places, or the wrong ones. I guess it's just a matter of perspective. Of course, whichever perspective you take depends on how you form an emotional response to a game. When you play a game, you take on the goals of that game as your own, and emotions occur in relation to the goals you've adopted. Effectively triggering negative emotional responses is particularly challenging, given the prevailing thought that games are simply structured playtime. But it actually happens a lot, especially since video games can easily use aesthetic elements to set a tone or tell a story. We each picked 5 of our favorite games that provoke the most melancholy emotional responses, and put them together to make a list of recommended plays. So without further ado, let's roll a list of some of the games that are best at making you go, aww. Grim Fandango is a sad story both in the game and in real life. It truly is a sort of swan song for the old-school LucasArts adventure games, and its brilliantly told story about post-mortem bureaucracy was just the beginning. Everyone in this universe hates their job, but is cursed to work it for all eternity in this gray doldrums of a limbo. The game's got a good sense of humor, but when you find these kids later on, you know where this thing's gonna go.
You bite me and I'll sue your parents.
Our parents?
Its writing and voice acting still hasn't been topped, but its abysmal puzzles caused it to be a commercial flop. It was an ominous celebration of the best and worst qualities of an entire genre, and that was enough to kill off big-budget adventure games for years.
Journey is a game with a full spectrum of emotional responses. There's about as many sad moments as there are happy ones, and its team impressively balances the two. It's a story of life that is articulated through non-verbal cutscenes and gameplay. The player must utilize their limited controls to foster feelings of relation and loss. However, the game becomes bittersweet by creating a world full of various emotions that climaxes in a seemingly utopic end. That's a damned hard thing to do in a game that has no dialogue or voice communications whatsoever.
Everyone dies, over and over and over again. The whole concept of this game is a melancholy fever dream, and its placement in an E-rated series about rescuing princesses causes only more confusion. Your hero's efforts to save this land are futile. It's destined for death. You can travel back in time to dodge the catastrophe, but what happens to everyone else? Those time travel logistics are a bit unclear, but what is clear are the details of the tragic subplots that you find behind almost every single character in this game. It's kind of a heavy load.
When I first played Braid, my initial reaction was one of longing and sadness. The protagonist has lost their love and must adventure through time-bending puzzles in order to reclaim her. However, my second playthrough a couple years later ended in a horrific realization. The protagonist is delusional and the player must orchestrate his delusion with him. I still came out feeling some kind of remorse in the end. There's a potential third, less feels-provoking interpretation involving the Manhattan Project, but you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get that one. Hopefully what most players will get are the same initial feels I had. Sad ones.
The atmospheric spirit of the Silent Hill series peaked with number 2, with the designers actively trying to imbue these places with the loneliness, regret, and depression that is pulled out from the story. Whereas other horror games are content to just shock you or gross you out, Silent Hill 2 puts you in a dark, filthy room all alone and gives you lots of quiet time to think about it. You have to play a deplorable character that you're supposed to pity, and you run him through an unforgiving gauntlet of the worst parts of his psyche. It's like they made this game out of pure anxiety, and it's emotionally exhausting.
The empty, barren world in Shadow of the Colossus seems cryptic at first. It starts off looking like a very basic fantasy adventure. However, Team Ico instead wants you to experience so much more. With only a horse and a comatose girl as company, the protagonist must overcome great odds in order to save the girl's life. The bonds between these characters are subtle, but the climatic end is nothing less than heartbreaking. It has one of the most bittersweet segments of gameplay I have ever experienced.
Kojima has no room for brevity. The strongly characterized cast of this game combines with a plot that's kept tight and simple, so you have plenty of room for his long-winded writing to play your emotions like a fiddle. The twists and turns this game takes are thankfully easy to grasp, but they're delivered with such an overwhelming amount of charisma that they hit you very, very hard. The writing, music, visuals, and voice acting of this pixel stage play come together in a way that's almost ideal. It's the perfect action game, complete with an introspective and tragic ending that plays the whole show out on a downer.
It's easy to see why people might assume that To the Moon would be an RPG, considering it was made in RPG Maker. Instead, Freebird Games delivers a straightforward adventure game that certainly had me on the verge of tears. You play as two scientists who can implant memories into a dying patient of a life they wish to have lived. As the title implies, the patient in this game wants to go to the moon. Fulfilling his dreams isn't the sad part. The emotional relationship he has with his wife is what'll get you sobbing. When you discover his complicated history and how the scientists managed to fulfill their mission, you will be hard-pressed not to cry.
The one Silent Hill game that a Western developer got right is also the one that deviated farthest from the series. Shattered Memories is a kind of alternate universe remix of the first game, but it doesn't share many of the same aesthetics or designs of the rest of the series. It might also be fair to say that the rest of the series doesn't get as emotionally heavy as this one. Its good parts play more like an adventure game, using puzzles and exploration to build up to a devastating ending. It's a tearjerker twist that cleverly recontextualizes the whole game, and it couldn't have been better.
The Walking Dead easily has some of the most heart-wrenching moments in recent memory. No matter what you decide, you are guaranteed to experience most of the cast's inevitably tragic fates. It hopes that Telltale provides some strong player-to-NPC interactions with Lee and Clementine. However, the relationships between the rest of the survivors are so heavily interwoven that almost every decision holds significant weight on the player. It's rare for a game to do it so easily without coming across as contrived.
It's no coincidence that this video both begins and ends with adventure games. This genre has a lot of potential for tastefully telling a mature story, and it hasn't gotten this much love in a long time. While The Walking Dead may not be a great example of game design, it's a stellar example of an interactive story. You're sharing the spotlight with the cast of survivors whose characters are very skillfully written, and the writers made sure to give them a bad case of Murphy's Law. The Walking Dead doesn't get really creative with the typical zombie fiction formula. It just takes that classic story and does a fantastic job of making it unimaginably tragic. Of all the games we discussed here, this is the one that hit hardest. This is the one that felt us up the worst.